As residents training and teaching hospitals, the culture of academic medicine is as familiar to us as the air we breathe, taken for granted and rarely commented on, let alone examined. Of course, we talk about aspects of culture all the time. Oh, that attending is amazing, or oh, working at this place really sucks. A few months ago, you may have heard your attendings and peers talking about an article published in Academic Medicine that also got a lot of play in the mainstream media. It was entitled, "Why Are a Quarter of Our Faculty Considering Leaving Academic Medicine?" A study of their perceptions of institutional culture and intentions to leave at 26 representative U.S. medical schools. Well, I am pleased to tell you that the lead author of that article, Dr. Linda Pololi, is here this morning as our keynote speaker. Dr. Pololi has spent much of her professional career studying the cultures of academic medicine, and perhaps more importantly, how it can be transformed to be more inclusive, more values-based, and ultimately more satisfying for physicians and the patients that we care for. Dr. Pololi went to medical school and completed her internal medicine training at the University of London Middlesex Hospital Medical School. She did a hematology and oncology fellowship in Chicago and held faculty positions at Brown University, East Carolina University, and the Universities of Illinois and Massachusetts. She was a principal investigator and founding director of the U.S. Public Health Service-funded National Center of Leadership in Academic Medicine at East Carolina University. And today, Dr. Pololi is founding director of the National Initiative on Gender, Culture, and Leadership in Medicine, SeaChange, at Brandeis University. In 2011, Dr. Pololi was awarded the Association of American Medical Colleges Women in Medicine and Science Leadership Development Award. It is a real honor to have her here today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Pololi.
So good morning, everybody, and thank you, Dr. Godfrey, for your kind introduction. And I'd like to thank Sandy Shea for the kind invitation to join you today. I'm especially honored, actually, to speak with you. I spend most of my time speaking with the faculty, but I recognize that among you are the future leaders of academic medicine and of medicine in other fields, too. So it's really an honor. And I look forward to thinking with you today about your role in changing the culture. My work, as Dr. Godfrey said, has focused for the last 7 or 8 years at Brandeis on the culture of academic medicine. And when we first started the SeaChange project, most people were a bit perplexed or even annoyed, actually, when we said that the culture of academic medicine might be linked to issues of professionalism, to vitality and productivity, to healthcare disparities, and to the advancement of some groups of faculty. Now, actually, this term's become rather fashionable, and so it's very nice to have a platform like this to speak with you about it. I moved to Brandeis, I think, 7 or 8 years ago, after a career in academic medicine in this country. I did my training in England, as you heard, and I had chosen to focus on medical education, on the personal and professional development of faculty. And early on, I was very interested in innovation in medical student education and in changing the learning environment. How could we make it so that it was easier and more humane learning experience for medical students? And there's now quite a deep literature on the so-called hidden curriculum for medical students. And less written about the curriculum for residents. And at that time, I found that the medical students were very enthusiastic about innovation in medical education. They just were very eager for change in their training. However, the faculty were really, for the most part, had just experienced very traditional and maybe somewhat abusive training themselves. So we decided, well, the way to attend to this was to somehow give the faculty some experience of a different way of learning and working, and then they would be much more likely to offer that to their trainees. And so I became more and more focused on the personal and professional development of medical school faculty. The work that we've been doing, the research we've been doing more recently, really builds the experiences I had where I was able to get to know the lives of faculty very well, and as I myself went up through the ranks and became professor of medicine. I witnessed very closely how academic medicine really treats its own greatest resource. I wanted our research in SeaChange to really be congruent with the changes that I sought in academic medicine. And I really wanted this work to contribute to a sort of inclusive, authentic, humane culture with vibrancy of learning. I'm going to tell you this morning just a little bit about the SeaChange project and some of the work that we've done. And then I hope we'll have plenty of time for discussion and to think about the roles that you might have in this. SeaChange was an action research project. That means we wanted to do research, but we actually wanted to make change too. And we wanted to bring about culture change, that it would be more affirming, supportive, inclusive for faculty and trainees. And we also had a particular interest in enhancing the diversity of leadership in academic medicine. We wanted to see more women and more members of underrepresented minority groups in leadership positions in academic medicine, because we figured that way, really our great academic health centers would be better able to fulfill their noble missions. So we've been very generously funded by the Macy Foundation and by a collaboration of 5 federal agencies. And I'm here, what I'll tell you about today really represents the work of a sort of large interdisciplinary research team that I've really had the privilege to work with. So what is the case for culture change? Well, faculty attrition rates. Dr. Godfrey mentioned an article we published about our data recently, and this is borne out by the data that comes out of the Association of American Medical Colleges, where they collect all the data on the nation's faculty. We found in our data that over a quarter of faculty said they had seriously considered leaving academic medicine altogether in the prior year. And 40% also their own institution. So that's a really unsustainable turnover rate. There are very high levels of faculty burnout in the country. Over 40% of faculty self-report as being burnt out. So nobody could argue that this is a group of people working at their optimal capacity. And then there's transigent lack of women in leadership and senior positions in academic medicine. In the average medical school, do you know there are 43 women full professors and 192 male full professors? Only 12% of clinical department chairs are women. If you look at the whole faculty in medical schools, only 4% are represented by female full professors. And it's absolutely not a pipeline problem. Over 30 years ago, in 1980, over 30% of medical students were women. And for quite some years now, almost half of medical students are female. So there are huge numbers of highly trained women who have come through the system and ought to be in some of these senior positions. And then academic medicine has shown a real inability to recruit and retain faculty from underrepresented minority groups. There's really an alarming lack in the medical schools. Only 3% of the faculty are African American. It's about 4% of faculty are from Hispanic or Latino groups. It's less than 0.1% Native American. And actually those figures actually overestimate because many underrepresented minority faculty actually are in the historically black schools. So if you actually take those groups away, it actually goes down to about 2%. There was a very interesting study reported just a few years ago in Nature by Martinson, who surveyed NIH-funded scientists in the country, most of whom are in the academic medical centers. And he found that fully a third of those scientists self-reported unethical behavior in their research. So we would ask, what is it in this culture that tolerates that degree of unethical behavior? And then in terms of our medical students, there's really now a robust literature documenting that through the 4 years of medical school, medical students become more cynical, less idealistic, less altruistic. And so there is this concept of the hidden curriculum and how the experiences of medical students, not the formal curriculum, but the other experiences of medical students and the behaviors they see modeled for them have this profound effect on. And really the research hasn't been done with residencies, but I guess it's much the same picture. So we thought, well, if we're going to change the culture, first of all, we have to really understand what's going on here. We need some sort of, some body of evidence. Medicine's very evidence-driven. So we conducted interview study in 5 medical schools. We invited 5 medical schools to join a consortium with SeaChange. And we interviewed men and women faculty in those schools. And then based on the qualitative data that we gathered from those interviews, we constructed a survey. And we fielded this survey in 26 randomly selected medical schools that represent different regions of the country, and public and private medical schools. Those schools that are NIH research focused and those who are more focused on community care. And we then selected a random selection of faculty within each of those 26 schools, and we have a sort of this huge national data set. And that quantitative data, together with our interview study, basically documents the culture as perceived through the eyes of the faculty. And we've recently adapted that survey for use in medical students. We're now, some medical schools are using it to see what's happening in terms of professionalism and the learning environment for their students. And we've also piloted it with residents. So what I would like to do is show you some sort of thin slices of this data so that you get a feel for what we found. And I hope you'll, some of you have agreed to help do that with me. And then the third phase, ongoing phase of SeaChange is that together with our 5 medical schools, we developed SeaChange practices, culture change practices, and they engaged in some of those activities. And I put in place, or try and put in place, culture change programs in various medical schools around the country as requested. The first part of any look at of a culture is to really stand still and to listen and watch what's going on, what are people saying. So I would like to share with you some direct quotations from our faculty interview study. These were conducted very confidentially. The schools and the deans didn't know who we were interviewing. We interviewed men and women from different stages of their career, early in their career, those who had plateaued, those who were actually in leadership positions, and those who had left academic medicine, from across all the different disciplines in medical schools. So I'll I'll start by reading a few of these quotations. They're all very representative of many of the themes we heard again and again from these sort of 100 or so faculty that we interviewed. It's not just a job. The teaching part is wonderful and new. The clinical part, the patients, are very exciting, and it's rewarding to have them and to treat them. And in terms of research, the results can benefit your patients. There's a lot of good reasons to be excited and enthusiastic about doing this. Doing academic medicine, you make an impact on the future physicians of America. I really do like the one-on-oneness of working with patients and getting to know them, establishing that rapport and hopefully getting them to open up to you and establishing the trust. I had my own lab. There was an unbelievably driving passion to answer questions in a way that I would be adding to the information that would make children's lives better. I saw that for me, clinical care was never going to be enough in medicine. I needed to take my intellect, drive it as far as I could, and for me that meant getting support doing experiments in the laboratory, presenting my results, and getting published, to get the information out. Academic medicine still does pride intellectual advancement and an eagerness for exploration and new knowledge. That's what fits with what I find rewarding. I get my biggest fire from taking young minds and helping to make them into physicians, high-quality physicians. And my motto around here is, I want to train people who I can send my mother and my sisters to. And I'm most successful in my work when I'm actually at the bedside. My values are to provide health care, education for the community at large, as well as the underserved community, and to pay particular attention to diversity in people and thinking. So we asked the faculty, what energized them in medicine, why they chose a career in academic medicine, about leadership, about their values, about equity issues. So these are the people that walk through the door every day. I've distributed a few more quotations to some of you, and I wonder if you would be kind enough to read those one by one. I think there was some request. Do you want to start the front row here? Yes. If you would maybe just like to stand up, and they're taping this, so I think they want you to face the camera. But even if you don't want to do that, that's okay. So just go ahead.
This is a place that doesn't recognize you as an individual. No one's interested in what a fun and interesting person I am. There's nobody who's interested in that. They're interested in the work I do, perhaps. But nobody cares what makes me tick here. I'm completely invisible, as a human, as a person. It just seems like I go through most of my day and no one really recognizes or acknowledges the person I think I am.
My opinion didn't matter, what I was feeling didn't matter. There were people who I passed every single day who were chairmen of departments, and I mean, good God, after 5 years, you've got to see a person.
I sent my resume for something, and when I showed up and someone said to me, "Your resume didn't look black." Can you imagine someone saying that?
Check your humanity at the door. That was how it felt. Any sign of, this is going to sound harsh, but any tendency toward kindness was viewed as weakness.
I've got a couple of papers I have data for, which have been sitting on my desk for a year. I don't have time to write them up, but I need to get them written up. I mean, I work almost every weekend for at least a full day. I am home frequently late at night, trying just to keep the clinical stuff up to date. You know, it's very frustrating. I'd like to spend more time with my wife and my child.
But I think what it breeds, and this gets to the heart of the academic culture, certainly at its lower and mid levels, is an unpleasant place in a lot of ways. People are scrambling up over one another, trying to find their way, trying to find their niche, and to find their grants and so forth. And I don't like it. I don't like what it does to people. And I think very nice, thoughtful people become very selfish and self-indulgent.
Well, I think the hardest thing for me was to be in a department where you couldn't express your opinion without feeling that you were jeopardizing your career. The hardest thing was that I wasn't honest to myself sometimes because I was afraid earlier on that I would lose my job. I would get kicked out of the department. Although I don't know if that would have happened, but it did happen to other people. There were people in our department who lost their jobs over their being expressive. Their lives were made absolutely miserable.
I think it has to do with the alignment of values, but you are by yourself. And sometimes I really have to just take a day off, which I call mental health days, and just get back to reality, to realize what the real world's about. So there are a lot of politics and just things about it which I think are awful.
But in an academic institution that doesn't value community, culture, partnerships, collaboration, I wouldn't have wanted to stay there. That's where I was going and what I value. It was really a dead end.
You are encouraged to be single-minded, self-indulgent, selfish. The first question out of people's mouth is, well, what is this going to do for me? What paper do I get out of it? Where do I go on the paper? Who's looking out for me? And all that stuff. And it's just like there should be enough to go around.
I wasn't driven by self-promotion, that I think has to come on in academic institutions. I think it's all about getting new grants. It's a club of, I have more than you and I'm an expert at this. So it's a little bit of unreal, self-promoting kind of environment.
I think academic institutions are still about me, the individual. They're not necessarily about community and collaboration. I think if academic medicine can figure this out, they can change how they promote people in a way that values collaboration, values community partnership, true partnership. What I mean by this is being able to share resources, share authority with the community, to share data, to take as long as it takes to develop a study, as long as it takes to help communities choose issues that are important to the community, which is the antithesis of the individual faculty member, isn't it? It's all about me. It's my issues, not yours. Oh, I just want to participate in, I just want you to participate in this, but it's really my study. So I think when academic institutions can get beyond that, then I think they'll attract more women, more Latinos, more American Indians. As long as they're about the individuals themselves, I don't think this will be successful.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you helped me read those. I still get upset even when I hear them. Based on this very sobering data, we constructed the survey, as I mentioned, and I just wanted to show you a little bit about survey quantitative data. We've done very sophisticated analysis on the data we collected from across the country from these 26 medical schools. And what we found was that 12 dimensions of the culture emerged from our data. They're very rigorous, very reliable scales. So each consists of a series of questions that sort of group themselves together. I'm going to show you just a few of these scales or these dimensions and a few examples of the responses to some of the questions. So each question is, an individual is asked to say to what degree they agree with the statement. So I'm going to show you the percent strongly agree and agree results. So first dimension is engagement. So, you know, how people feel energized and personally satisfied in their work, enthusiastic about their work. So 92% of the faculty agree with the statement, I find my work to be personally satisfying. They find great meaning in their work. 76% say, I feel energized by my work. And 41% of the faculty say, I feel burnt out. Another dimension is this concept of relatedness and feeling that one is included, oneself, one belongs in one's organization. It also assesses trust. There's a sense of trustworthiness in the culture. So a quarter of the faculty say, I feel ignored or invisible here. Similarly, 29%, I feel isolated here. And they're reluctant to express their opinions for fear of negative job consequences. And values alignment is another dimension that comes out. And this is the alignment of one's own personal, individual values with what you observe being in your organization. What are the things that are rewarded in your organization? So they're observed values as opposed to sort of espoused mission. And pretty well every institution has the same, more or less, espoused mission. So my institution's actions are well aligned with its stated values and mission. About half the faculty agree with that. And similarly, half the faculty feel that their own values are well aligned with their institution's values. And I'm glad to say that 79% of the faculty think that their institution demonstrates a commitment to serving the public regardless of income, race, ethnicity. Other types of values fall in this domain. So 40% of the faculty say that the faculty have a high morale. Half the faculty say the administration is only interested in me for the revenue I generate. And there are items in this dimension about the value placed on teaching, the value placed on clinical excellence, which are pretty shocking. Another dimension is ethical and moral distress. And a predominant theme that emerged from our data was that many of the faculty feel ethically compromised and feel some sort of moral distress themselves. And another sort of dimension of this scale is also the sense that one is being adversely changed oneself by working in this culture. So 25% of the faculty say the culture of my institution discourages altruism. 28% other people have taken credit for my work here. 82% of the faculty, men and women, say you have to be a self-promoter to get ahead here. And 22% of the faculty say I find myself being more aggressive here than I like. And in fact, in our attrition study, where we looked at the reasons for people actually leaving their institution and leaving academic medicine, we found that the one dimension of the culture that really distinguished those people who said they were seriously considering academic medicine altogether was this sense of ethical, moral distress and being adversely changed by working in the culture. It was a very, very sobering finding. There are other dimensions of the culture that are linked to dissatisfaction and wanting to leave, low engagement and low self-efficacy and a low sense of of relatedness or having relationships among colleagues in the institution. But ethical moral distress just stood out alone in terms of leaving academic medicine. And then there are two equity scales, one regarding equity for women, and then a second one, equity for underrepresented in medicine minority faculty members. And in these two scales, there are very significant gender differences among men and women. Whereas 60% of female faculty say it's harder for female faculty to get ahead here than for male faculty, only 21% of male faculty are aware of that. Similarly, 43% of women say the institution treats women and men equitably with respect to promotion, whereas 70% male faculty perceive it's equitable. And then, as you would expect, women are much more aware of instances of gender discrimination than men are. And then similarly, we see a similar pattern with the underrepresented minority faculty. We have a paper on the experience of underrepresented minority faculty coming out in a few months. There's a gap between what underrepresented minority faculty members are aware of in terms of inequity and discrimination and what non-minority faculty are aware of. It's similar to the gender difference. So about a quarter of minority faculty think it's harder for members of minority groups to get ahead than non-minority faculty. And then another dimension that fell out was the integration of work and life. So sort of the perception of institutional support for managing your work and your personal responsibilities. And men and women equally find the workplace family, about half of them think the workplace is family friendly, three-quarters of them feel they can take time for their personal or family issues when they need to. However, the women, if the culture is daunting for faculty generally, it seems it's even more so for women faculty. They feel that it's more difficult to succeed in academic medicine they feel they have to sacrifice more in terms of their personal responsibilities. But it's interesting that when we looked at the data about faculty leaving academic medicine, if somebody said yes, they were dissatisfied and had thought about, if we asked them if they had seriously considered leaving their institution and/or academic medicine. And if they said yes, they had, then we asked them what were the reasons, and they could say they were dissatisfied, or they could say it was for personal family reasons or for retirement. And only 5% of the faculty said it was for personal or family reasons. And then when we delved into dissatisfaction, leaving for dissatisfaction, we did not find any gender difference there. That was not related, to children and such issues, which is sort of what's really bandied around a lot. I think that's one of the myths that's talked a lot about. What we found is that actually women don't really leave. There's a tiny difference. They're slightly more likely to leave academic medicine than males, but it's just really a minuscule difference. So that was, when we first started these studies, and we reviewed the literature about women, because the deans of the consortium of the 5 medical schools that we initially invited to partner with us in these studies were very interested in how their women faculty were doing, because they knew they had problems. There was a 30-year literature on, what happened to the women in academic medicine. So they knew that they would really like to address the issues around the lack of advancement of their women faculty. And if you reviewed the literature, it explained this sort of discrepancy was largely explained negotiate as well as the men, then they would do as well. And so that, if women were equally well trained in whatever skills they needed, then they would advance in the same way as men. And they said, well, women are distracted by their children. They're not taking medicine as seriously as the men. They said, the literature said, well, they don't stick around long enough. They leave academic medicine. And the fourth reason given was, well, actually, they're not really that interested in leadership either. So those were the four, I think, myths. I call them myths, which were, laid out to explain the lack of women's advancement. And it was really because of what we found in the literature. We said, really, all these smart, well-intentioned people are trying to address this for 30 years, and we just had to take a much broader approach to these issues and really look at the culture, look at more systemic organizational issues in the hope of understanding what's happening. So our quantitative data in many ways in the qualitative data. And then in terms of leadership aspirations, we have a dimension that assesses leadership aspirations, and we found that there was absolutely no difference between the men and the women in terms of their aspirations for leadership, so we were happy to see that. And actually, when we compared this dimension and the responses of faculty from underrepresented minority groups and non-minority groups, we actually found that faculty from underrepresented minority groups had higher leadership aspirations. So we've published a lot of this data. This is my book, which the publisher asked me to write this book about our research, and they really wanted a book about the perspectives of women faculty. So actually the book does focus on women, but what we found was that women and underrepresented minority faculty were actually sort of on the margins of the culture, and as we would expect, as all the great sociological studies show, it's really people on the margins who are more able to very clearly articulate the culture than those who are in the sort of dominant majority. So the book is not really about women. Our research is not really about women, although we do have an interest in diversifying the leadership, both with my underrepresented minority faculty and with women faculty. But we feel that we can really learn from the voices of women and those in minority groups, because so much more clearly. And we've published a lot of articles about our research, and we still have more coming out. So I would say to you, because you all work in academic health centers, and you're all very familiar with probably a lot of, I would be interested in knowing what of this resonates with you and your own experiences. But some of you, I expect, will be moving into faculty positions. And I guess my feeling is that you really have to understand very clearly what the culture is before you can try and make an attempt to change it. So I would say to you in your current roles and in your future roles that you really have to stay true to yourself. You have to stay true to what really excites you. You have to be very wary about conforming to ideas that don't sit well with you, and that things that you think are wrong, and to ideas of bygone years. You really need to stay true to your own values. You need to think about what are my values, and then hold true to those. And then you can change the culture, as I very much hope that you will. So I guess, this, if some of these are just a sort of short list, summary list of what we found were the predominant themes about why faculty chose careers in academic medicine. And if you find that some of these sort of resonate with what you want to do for yourself, then you should be aware of that there is a place where you can act on those aspirations. So I hope we have some time now. How are we doing? Oh, not much. But anyway, I'd be very interested in your thoughts about how you feel you fit in with what we've talked about this morning. Thank you.
There's microphones in the aisles here.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'll let you go ahead first, please.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Pololi, so much for an excellent presentation. We'll open this up to questions. Delegates, please keep your remarks brief so that as many of you can speak as possible, and make sure to say your name and where you're from. Anybody?
I recognize this phenomenon. It's actually very difficult listening to this data. It's very difficult. It's very uncomfortable reading and listening. We actually had quite a lot of trouble getting a lot of our research published initially because people said, "How could this be?"
So I actually have a question. How do you do this without getting backlash? Because I have a brief story. In my fellowship this last year, there's a younger faculty member that works above me and has taught me this year. She's new, and one of the more senior anesthesiologists in the operating room just would always come in the room when she was operating and say, "Hey, honey, how you doing? Hey, what's going on?" Never would address her formally, and it really bothered her, and she never said anything about it. And so one day in the operating room, I said, "It's Dr. Young, it's not honey, it's not sweetie. You can't say that these days." I told him that in front of the whole OR team. Well, that went well, and he changed his behavior. But consequently, he was terrible to me for the rest of my fellowship, and really made my life difficult. In a lot of ways. Patients that I wanted to discharge that were day surgery patients, he said, no, they have to be admitted. So it was this back and forth. So when you're pushing toward a culture change, how do you do it and do it with grace and avoid backlash?
Yes. Well, you were very courageous, and we thank you. And I feel very strongly that regarding the bias, the unconscious and the conscious bias that women clearly experience in academic medicine, I feel very strongly that this is not women's work. For the people sort of automatically assume it's women's work. It's not. We need much broader shoulders to take on these issues. And so you demonstrated that responsibility. I suppose, so I think it was great. I was as you were telling your story, I was thinking, oh, I do hope you said something. I hope you said it and not the female surgeon. But I suppose this attending felt humiliated by your comments, which would be, the culture of academic medicine, right? It's what we've all come to expect. Humiliation is rife in our culture. So it might be good to have taken him aside and told him what you told him, still with that courage, or go with one other person. Sometimes we need a person next to us to give us courage, and said, I'm uncomfortable when you address the, Dr. So-and-so in this way. I know that you probably don't intend to offend her, but actually it's a form of sexual harassment and gender discrimination. And, I just wanted to sort of have a conversation with you about that. And I don't know, but I think that I suppose that you're going to have to take some flack for standing up for what you think is right.
But I think also responding in the same way that where the culture is viral, right? So if I do it publicly and embarrass him, it's just perpetuating bad behavior.
Well, in some way, yes. Of course, everybody else in the room, however, that heard you say that was cheering you. Now they probably weren't feeling sufficiently courageous to say, I think that too. But actually, so, you know, there was actually a good side to what you did publicly as well. So,
Thank you. I enjoyed the talk.